Alrighty. Who is Dave Chappelle? He is a comedian, possibly one of the most well known and famous comedians there is. And he's garnered a lot of respect for being one of the edgier comedians. His comedy hasn't exactly preserved itself well coming into this generation of cancel culture on Twitter. The same's happened to a lot of other very edgy comedians. And we've seen this new trend of these comedians who have their own Netflix special or their own, they're getting work, clearly. They're making money and everything. Going up on stage and complaining about people on Twitter being mean to them and how they can't make their jokes anymore and they're being censored. Meanwhile, they've got their own Netflix special. You know what I mean? We lefties have been making fun of that for a while now, right? Well, a couple days ago, Dave Chappelle I watched it before bed last night because I wanted to cover it today. And I thought maybe there were just going to be some out-of-touch boomer jokes in there, maybe something sort of in line with the type of jokes that Dave Chappelle makes, but maybe kind of iffy with the LGBT community. And of course, I knew of the clip where Dave Chappelle would say he's Team TERF, he stands with J.K. Rowling. I knew about that clip, but I thought that would be the worst of it. And oh, fuck, was it not? That was not the worst of it. I don't know why the clip of Dave Chappelle saying he's Team TERF and he stands with J.K. Rowling, I don't know why that trended more than the, I shit you not, like 10-minute long joke/story about how he ended up beating up a butch lesbian woman in a bar fight. I'm not kidding you. He goes on for about 10 to 15 minutes telling a long story about how he ended up beating up a lesbian woman in a bar fight after a show or after he was watching a show. Yeah, it was pretty yikesy. I suppose I'll just sort of give a cliff notes of some of the jokes that were made during the special, because I can't just play it. I'll get copyrighted, so I have to do my best to reiterate the things that he was saying to all of you without getting canceled, because it is pretty yikesy. Very yikesy, the kind of jokes he was making. Stuff that if I repeated word for word would have me expelled from every facet of the lefty circles, okay? So Dave Chappelle goes up there and he starts doing his normal routine. Like the first bit of it isn't really about LGBT people or any like minority group in particular, other than, you know, making fun of white people a little bit, which is par for the course with him. He does make fun of white people and, you know, it's okay. But then he starts to get into the LGBT stuff. And he starts to talk about Twitter cancel culture, and it goes on like that. If you've seen any clip of a comedian complaining about cancel culture, it was that, just rehashed in Dave Chappelle's style. And then it goes on into something a little spicier, the LGBT community. And he is like, oh, I don't have any hatred in my heart for the LGBT community. I don't care. I don't care about the, you know, as long as they're not hurting anybody. And yet continuously, he misgenders trans people. He makes jokes about how trans people are men. Trans women are men, apparently. You know, he goes on about that. And there was this one joke/story. You could never know if it's actually true. Regardless of whether or not it's true, it's still pretty fucked up to say. But here was a joke/story that he told about midway through the special. He talked about how he was, you know, this is after the Chappelle show ended, and he was doing a show at a nightclub or some bar. Like, it was not a very prestigious place. And he was up there making jokes, and a lot of them were about trans people. And there was this one trans woman in the audience who was laughing the loudest every time he would tell the jokes about trans people. The way that he described it made me think, so like, it was Gammy from Twitter, basically. This lady, just imagine this lady is Gammy from Twitter and just loves transphobic humor. And so this trans woman's like right at the front, clapping and laughing her ass off at every transphobic joke that Dave Chappelle is making at this bar like 20 years ago at this point. And she talks about how she's always wanted to be a comedian, and Dave Chappelle was her, you know, like her idol, and they became friends. And he got her on to make some jokes as an opener for one of his shows when he got a little bit bigger. And the story goes on. And eventually she started to get quite the following. But the trans community hated her because of the transphobic jokes she would make. And so then she kills herself, the trans woman comedian that Dave Chappelle befriended. Don't know if any of this is true or not. This all could be just a joke that he made everything up. She kills herself, and then Dave Chappelle makes a joke about her, saying that, this is the quote, "That man was the hottest woman I ever saw in my life." Or no, it was like, "That man was the best woman I ever met in my life," I think was the quote. That's what he ends the story with. About the one trans friend that he made. And then tells the story about how she died, and then ends the story with that. And he goes on to say she would have loved that joke, and I have no doubt she probably would have. No, that story is true? Well, Lonnie has confirmed it. That was the end of the story. So, to give you an idea, the nature of their relation is disputed, if I recall correctly. Oh, her family has spoken out in defense of Chappelle? Okay, then it seems like it's whatever, okay? It doesn't matter whether or not the story is true. He goes on to talk about J.K. Rowling and how she single-handedly wrote Harry Potter, and, the Harry Potter books are really successful, and she got canceled. And this is what he says: J.K. Rowling got canceled for, I'm not going to directly quote her because it wasn't exactly that, and then he goes on to lie about what she said. He goes on to say that all she did was say that gender is real. Or that sex is real, something like that. That's what he reiterates her point as. So he just lies about what she actually said. Anyway, he goes on for a while. He literally lies about what J.K. Rowling said in her little message, her like newsletter she put out, her TERF manifesto she made. He literally lies about what she said in that. And he ends it off, telling some more transphobic jokes, and then boom, it's over. But there was one part of the Chappelle special that really stood out to me, an argument that he made that really stood out to me, and that I really wanted to respond to. Because he talks about how he doesn't believe his jokes and his comedy are influencing people. He says, I believe the words he says is something like, "People don't go to me to get their opinions. I just make jokes about shit. People come to me to laugh." And I was really surprised he said this, because I'm not even a comedian. And he's the most well-known out there, and I know that's not true. People, comedy has evolved a lot, especially stand-up comedy over the years. Nowadays, stand-up comedy isn't just you go up on stage and you tell a bunch of jokes over and over again. At least that's not the best stand-up comedy. The best stand-up comedy usually follows a format of telling a story and delivering a message or a lesson for the audience to have learned from it, That's what I like. For example, George Carlin. My favorite comedian of all time is George Carlin. I love George Carlin. Most of his funniest sketches to me, or his funniest little, clips or whatever, his bits, are when he tells a story. Doesn't have to be a story about him or a thing that he's experienced, but just telling a story. That was always his best comedy, and always had some kind of lesson, and he was quick to get politics involved as well. And since the days of George Carlin popularizing that, at least as far as I can tell, I'm no scholar of stand-up comedy by any means, but ever since that started to become the norm, I feel like people don't just go to comedians to hear funny jokes anymore, especially the kind of stand-up comedians that we're talking about here. I think They go there to hear the opinions that comedian has, have arguments made in their favor in a funny way. Because the jokes Dave Chappelle were making weren't just gay people dumb, ha ha. It was the jokes. The butt of every joke was that the LGBT community is wrong. That was the butt of every joke he was making, and the audience was clapping for it. And it's very clear that when he makes the joke that trans women are men, when he makes that joke and then says he sides with J.K. Rowling and he's on Team TERF, it's not just a joke. It's very obvious that's what he believes. And he's making an argument in favor of that ideology and that opinion, which is transphobic, in a funny way. And that audience is there, clapping along and cheering as he goes. So my response would be that nowadays, comedians aren't really seen as just these entertainers. They're also kind of seen as, in a way, educators and persuaders in a lot of cases. At the end of the day, this whole Dave Chappelle thing, I think the special is probably going to get taken off of Netflix, and this is one of those moments where it's like, if that does happen, that gives Dave Chappelle not exactly what he wants, but exactly what he needs to continue this narrative. If his show gets removed from Netflix, he can point to that as an example of the cancel culture mob trying to destroy him, and he can use it as a bit for his next thing. And as we go down the line in the future, people are going to start to, buy into the narrative of the cancel culture destruction of everything we care about, narrative. And what worries me in particular is that I think this cancel culture narrative is going to lead almost like a repeat of 2015 into another explosion of right-wing populist fervor, like what happened with the anti-SJW community online. I think that the sort of anti-SJW community is going to evolve into surrounding their narrative around cancel culture, and it's going to get really popular in the mainstream, just like the anti-SJW shit did back in the day, and that may be what a future Republican candidate some years down the line ends up taking advantage of, much like Trump did, in order to get elected, or to have more populist fervor for their candidacy going around online. We'll see. We'll see. I really don't want there to be a Gamergate 2, but I don't know. I don't think it's impossible. Not at this point. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, subscribe, ring the bell icon if you haven't already over on YouTube, so YouTube actually tells you when I go live or upload a new video. We're also trying to hit 75k subs by the end of the year, so feel free to subscribe to help us get there. And of course, if you want to see more from me, you can go down into the description and follow my social media, including joining my fan Discord, where I watch movies with fans and we play games and stuff like that all the time, and there are sometimes people even come on to debate me. And if you want to support me financially, you can donate, subscribe, or gift subs to my website over on YouTube, Twitch, Streamlabs, or through Patreon. Thank you guys so much for watching, and have a good one.